1 week season.
And welcome in, OWS fam. So glad you are with us. We are back on the DFS Lab, as always, presented by 1 week season, where the purpose of this show is to build a DraftKings lineup. Use that as a way to talk through the upcoming slate. In this case, we are looking ahead towards week 10. It is Thursday, November 7th, when you will be watching this. And as always, I'm your host, Cheeseman, and pleasure welcoming up StatATL. Stat, I like the, rocking the DraftKings merch. Of course, we love DraftKings, and, that's what the show's all about. So how was it for you in week 9?
Man, week nine was not great. I had a pretty big conviction on one play that I played predominantly across my lineups that actually I thought was really strong, had upside for a lot more, but still was a really strong play. The big challenge for me is I generally play a pretty tight player pool, as we talk about here, and I talked about on like my first look and stuff like that. I think I had like 14 or 15 wide receivers in my pool across my 150 lineups, and my like 4 or 5 of my highest, like 5 or 6 owned wide receivers were like Chris Olave, Drake London, AJ Brown, CeeDee Lamb, basically all the wide receivers that got hurt. So not a great week. I think I was like minus 70% ROI, but like that's kind of the way that I play. Like the goal is, when you hit your core and you hit your main bets, that you've got a lot of lineups competing for the top. And when you deal with injuries or you just aren't on the right guys, it just makes it really hard to get to the top. So
yeah, dude, injuries are tough. And I did not play as much this past weekend just because their life stuff going on, but just figured I'm going to listen to my typical podcast, throw in a couple lineups, and just figured I'm going to do 5 or 6 lineups, so I might as well just go a very tight player pool. And so I did lock Chase Brown, but not that was necessarily rocket science, but did lock CeeDee Lamb. And yeah, man, CeeDee Lamb has been the source of a lot of losses for me this season. But hey, it is what it is. You gotta, like you said, you gotta pick your lane and be committed, and not get discouraged or frustrated, because the one weekend where he does go off, CeeDee Lamb that is, or maybe he's done for the season, but you don't want to be that weekend as the one that you finally just said, nah, I can't do it anymore. He's going to cause me to lose again, so I'm just not going to. That's a worse feeling than just playing them and having to accept those L's. But yeah, man. So let's take a look at last week real fast. Last week's lineup. This was a solid lineup. Bo Nix and Cortland Sutton, that stack did very well, despite the fact that, the Broncos lost. It still put up good points. Obviously, you had Nick Chubb in this lineup, which I think anyone could have expected that, would have had Chase Brown instead. But, do we count this in the 5 of 8 coming into last week? Do we count this? We have to count this?
Yeah, I think we count this as a loss. So as is on this roster, I think we scored right at 130, which would not have cashed. But later in the week we got the news about Zach Moss being inactive. I think I played about 70% Chase Brown myself. I think you said you locked him, like he was just such an obvious value. He was 5,900. We did have the salary to get to him, so had you gone Brown instead of Chubb, the roster scores 21 or 22. I'm not even sure how many Nick Chubb scored. Under 10. I think you maybe scored 6 or 8 points. So yeah, get you into the low 150s, and yeah, that would have cashed. But I think for transparency, I think we are 5 of 9. Just kind of sticking with that. I know earlier in the season we kind of had a similar situation, and kind of stuck to that rule of, it's like, hey, that's not the roster we built on screen, so we're not gonna count it. But had we been a little looser-gooser with this, loosey-goosey, we could be 7 of 9, but I think realistically, we're 5 of 9. So
yeah, for sure. What do you like about this lineup? Obviously, I think that the Bo Nix and Cortland Sutton, that ended up being really sharp, and it just I should know this, but I think Denver, they scored just 10 points, right, in that game. And
yeah, they scored 10 points. They got blown out 41-10, I think was the score. And so this was when we were kind of doing the lead in, this is who I was hinting at. So I was really high. I think I had like 60% of my exposure to the Bo Nix, Cortland Sutton stack. Maybe it was like 50% Bo Nix, Cortland Sutton. And then I had like 10% Bo Nix, Troy Franklin, who had end zone looks as well. But this stack was like really where I kind of met my bet for this week. Despite only scoring 10 points, they combined for, I think, just over 45 points at 11,200 or 11,300 in salary. So they kept you right at that 200-point pace. And I mean, there was so much more upside that you could have gotten out of that. Twice in the fourth quarter, Denver had first and goal from, I think, once from the 6 and once from the 8. And neither time did they get points on it. On one of the drives, Bo Nix actually had a rushing touchdown that got called back for a holding call. So that would, that's another 6 points if he gets there. But, obviously way more upside if he throws some passing. If he gets one of those two, turns into a touchdown. But yeah, I mean, no regrets, as they say. Like I thought this was really sharp, and I know it wasn't something that, as a site, we were really high on. It was something that I wrote up in the Discord and kind of talked about, I think, last week on the DFS labs. I'm a little bummed that the Thursday night game is the Ravens and the Bengals, but just even with Bo Nix's lower point, he put up 18 or 19 points in this game. That still keeps quarterbacks through 9 weeks averaging 25 points against Baltimore. And the wide receiver one, I think Cortland Sutton put up 26 points, still keeps the wide receiver one record at like 21 or 22 points. And that includes that includes Mike Evans, who got hurt in the first quarter and had like 1 for 25. So yeah, I mean, to me, this was just like such a low owned stack. Like I think Bo Nix was like 4% owned, and obviously paired with Cortland Sutton, like that combinatorial ownership was much lower, like probably 1% owned, maybe 2%. But like, yeah, I mean, to me, this was just like a really sharp way. And one of the things that I really like to talk about is just, if you've been an OWS member for a while, or you've been playing DFS for a long time, like you understand like the edge is not in always identifying like the good plays. Like, there's so much more information out here. I mean, obviously we do these DFS labs with 5 really sharp contributors every day of the week. It's just like having the willingness to think for yourself. Like, oh, well, I'm not seeing a lot of industry buzz on Bo Nix, so he's like not a great play. Well, if your research leads you to thinking that Bo Nix is a strong play, which is where my research led me this week, and it wasn't unpopular last week, but I really love Cedric Tillman, and why can't I think of the quarterback for the Browns?
Oh, Jameis, famous Jameis.
Yeah, I mean, I wrote that up on my Tuesday morning first look last week, even before it was like in the end, like just kind of seeing what makes sense to you. That's going to make you unique in your roster builds just on its own. It's just kind of thinking for yourself. So that's where I kind of landed on Sutton and Nix. Just from my research, I was like, this just makes too much sense. It's going to be low owned, so it's kind of that 1 week season mantra of what do you win when you win? Well, okay, if I'm right, and Bo Nix had gotten that rushing touchdown, Or maybe instead of a rushing touchdown, he throws a touchdown to Cortland Sutton instead of the opposite, which actually happened. Cortland Sutton actually threw a touchdown to Bo Nix in this game. But, if one of those 2 times they're inside the 10-yard line and they get no points, if you get another 11 points out of Sutton and Nix from, a passing touchdown to Sutton, now you're on you're on a 5x, 6x pace, 5.5 pace. Like that's huge. That's a 270 point pace or something like that from just these 2 guys, and they're inexpensive. So, it's just kind of those things of like, when you're right, does it really benefit you? We were both really right about Chase Brown. We both had him in a lot of our lineups, and that helps, like getting those, whatever he scored, 26, 28, 30 points, like that helps, but he was also 40% owned. So like half the field is moving up with you. So it helps, but it doesn't help the same way as kind of being on something that is sharp, but it's just unowned. Like you're getting that 5x, 6x score, and only 1 or 2% of people are getting like that's so much more beneficial. So,
yeah. And I liked what you said when you said, I like this play in my research, but it's not getting a lot of buzz around the industry, so it must not be a good play. That is, I think, like being able to get around that mindset is incredibly important, because I've fallen into that trap as well. Like, well, I'm not seeing any of the people I typically really pay attention to. They haven't talked about this guy yet this week, and so maybe I'm not seeing something, and kind of just not having that confidence. But it really does. You have to kind of like do some of your own research. If you're just kind of like, if you don't have the time to at least do a little bit and find some conviction on your own, that's going to be tougher. But if you do have time and you know what you're looking at, and you're able to be sharp in your analysis, then you got to trust that to a certain extent. And so I liked how you made a point of that. I think that's really important. So good stuff. Anything else you wanted to add with that?
No, it was hard for this roster to really, do much better. Obviously we had some good pieces. Devon A. Chan did really well here as well. But our most expensive player on this roster, AJ Brown, gets hurt in the first quarter, and he was off to a good start. I think he left with 2 catches for 35 yards in 1 quarter, but he still got 75% of the game left to play, and taking a 5 or a 6 or some 5 points from your most expensive player, not typically the recipe for success.
For sure, yeah. And I know I'm gonna just pull up DraftKings, but I know that you did. You typically do lineup review. You switched it up a little bit this week, right? More of a first look, and make sure to check that out, guys, in the top right corner. StatATL's, his solo show that he did this week. Okay, so let's pull up. We got obviously the 10-game slate this week, and we'll hit up our typical $50 single entry contest.
Yep, the red zone.
Yeah, that's right. Red zone. Did I already skip past it? There we go. We'll go with the 45. All right, so we got it pulled up here. This week, week 10, and if you haven't checked out yet the DFS lab that myself and Hilo did, we built a Tampa Bay led stack with Baker on the road at San Francisco, and then Mike and Maximus on Wednesday. They built what was it? I think they went with Justin Herbert, maybe. I'm not exactly sure, but definitely check that out. That is a FanDuel focused show. And so, obviously the strategy a little different on FanDuel than DraftKings. But in this one, man, I mean, you got the one game, that San Francisco Tampa game, over under of 50, a bunch of games in the 46s, Minnesota, Jacksonville. What kind of stands out to you so far as we look here at week 10?
Yeah, I mean, I think just kind of from a macro perspective, and talked a little bit about it in my first look. So, we're down from a 12 and a 13 game slate the last two main slates, down to 10 games this week. Pricing feels tight again this week. I feel like DraftKings continues to do a really good job of making it, I don't want to say difficult, but not just, you can't just plug in all the plays you want to play. There's more strategy to it. It is a little tighter pricing. And so I think, just looking at the Vegas totals, taking into account some tighter pricing, I think, last week we had a little bit higher scoring, as kind of we talked about on the show. I think I said you're going to have to probably score 230 to 240 points. I think the Millie Maker scored like 250 last week. I think that this week, a little tighter pricing, again, lots of range of outcomes in all the different games, but I would think the most likely scenario is the Millie Maker winner, or kind of your mid to larger field tournaments will be probably won around 190 to 200 points this week. Maybe low 200s would be my guess. So I don't know that really changes the way that we build, because you're always looking for upside. But I think generally, when you're playing a smaller field, or when you think the winning score is likely to be a little bit lower, kind of emphasizes two things. One, raw points kind of being really important. So trying to account or acknowledge the players that can score those 25, 30-point games, which I think on this slate is probably 10 or less players that really have that 25 to 30-plus point upside. And then also accounting a little bit for floor. Because again, we're never looking for a min cast. That's never our goal. But if a tournament winning score is 195, 200 points, that generally means it's going to be somewhere around 140 points to cash. So, thinking about a little bit of floor if you're kind of making a 1-versus-1 decision, I think is something interesting to keep in mind this week as well.
Absolutely. Now, as far as games, great overview. As far as games that we like or teams that we like, I mean, I'll give you one that I'm just glancing here. One thing that I was a little regretful last week was that this is one of the things I always look for, is because I feel like it is played less often by the field than it has a chance of hitting, and that is just finding a big home favorite. Because a lot of times people will shy away from like a 10-point favorite just because they think, there's not going to be a competitive game, so I can't like do a stack and bring back type of thing. And obviously, if there's a game that we're feeling is going to be a great game environment, then that'd be a bigger priority. But last week there wasn't really any games that we just felt, hey, this is going to be like an amazing game environment, and so it's kind of a little harder to know where to go. And so I wish that I would have looked at, like, you had the Baltimore offense, which had some big pieces come out of it. They were big home favorites against Denver. There was one other one that I'm forgetting right now, but one that I will point out, and I don't think this is going to be that popular just because the Chiefs have just not been putting up big fantasy scores. Also, Denver's defense is really good. But Kansas City at home, 8-point favorites. Patrick Mahomes on Monday night finally had a decent game in terms of a fantasy score for at the quarterback position. And maybe it was an aberration, but the fact that he has actually a capable wide receiver now in DeAndre Hopkins, who's starting to get things warmed up a bit, I just wondered to myself, is there a chance that Patrick Mahomes could finally put up a big game and no one will be on him? Now, again, it's a tough spot to go because Denver's defense is very good. But just as I was glancing at this, I'm saying, okay, I know that the Chargers, obviously, they're in a good spot because they're that big home favorite. But also Kansas City. I don't think anyone was going to want to play Kansas City this week. Just again, or certainly not the passing attack. Maybe Kareem Hunt, but not the passing attack. And so that 8-point favorite, a decent implied team total. What if Mahomes and, Kelsey and DeAndre Hopkins ends up being a nice stack? They put up 30 and Mahomes finally just kind of shakes off this kind of early season, kind of a slow start that he's had, an un-Patrick Mahomesian start. So anyway, that's a lot of words right there, but that's what I'm thinking. The kind of something that stood out to me. What about you as far as game environments or where you maybe want to go with this lineup?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's interesting for sure. I mean, you were hearkening back on last week and just saying, the Ravens put up 41 points and had, some really large scores from Lamar and from Zay Flowers and from, I think Derrick Henry had 2 touchdowns. against the same Broncos defense, who was on the road again, last week. So yeah, I totally see that viable for the Chiefs. And the pieces are less expensive. Kelsey is a reasonable price. I think that DeAndre Hopkins is going to be one of, if not the most popular wide receiver, just because with value being kind of hard to come across. Like, he had his big game on Monday night after pricing's released. I think that if they put out the pricing on Tuesday, DeAndre Hopkins is at least $1,000 more. So people will just see that value. I wouldn't be surprised if DeAndre Hopkins is 20+% owned this week. But yeah, I mean, how many people are going to play Mahomes, Kelsey, and Hopkins, or Mahomes, Hopkins and Hunt, just kind of betting on grabbing a lot of the pieces of that Kansas City offense. It wasn't a spot that stood out to me, like for a stack. I kind of think my under the radar, low owned kind of gem this week, kind of similar of like kind of the last 2 weeks where just like on paper, people are not going to like want to run to play them. But they're Drake May stacks, like Drake May and Hunter Henry, like under 10,000. And in the 3 games that Drake May has been healthy, like, he's played 4 games this season. One of them he left with a concussion. But in the 3 other games where he was healthy and played the full game, like, him and Hunter Henry put up game scores of 38, 35.6, and 31.5 or so. And they're only like 96, 9,700 combined. So, that's kind of keeping you on almost a 4x pace. And like, Drake May certainly has upside. Obviously, like the Bears are a decent defense. But to me, that's a spot where you could get a 5x combined score out of the 2 of them, and it's likely going to be really low owned. Where else do I like? I like the Bills against the Colts. I think that's a really strong spot for Josh Allen. Vikings against the Jaguars, like that's a really strong spot through the air for Minnesota. So like Justin Jefferson is like in my opinion, is like one of the 2 or 3 best plays on the entire slate. I think he's the most expensive player. So with tight pricing, I'll be curious to kind of see what percentage of the field is getting there. I think that's really interesting. Obviously, the 49ers and Bucks game is interesting. I know you mentioned high-low built around that. I think I'm more interested in that from the other side of the ball, building like double stacks around Purdy. What else is interesting? Falcons and Saints, I think it's a good game environment. I think the Jets and the Cardinals is interesting. I think Aaron Rodgers, I think is an interesting, intriguing play here. Easy to stack him. Like his 2 main weapons both saw double-digit targets last week. Right. So it's like it's very obvious where the ball's going there. So I think you could build around that game. I think you could build around the Eagles with Jalen Hurts. AJ Brown practiced today, so that's like a good sign after leaving, like practicing on a Wednesday. I think you could go there. And then you mentioned the Chargers at the Titans. I think that's really intriguing, and that's probably the spot that I want to build around today, because I think that's a spot that's really going under the radar. And so what I mean by that, so like the Chargers, since their week 5 bye, so their last 4 games, they came out of their bye and they kind of completely changed the way that they're playing offense. So the first 4 weeks of the season, they were averaging 22 pass attempts a game. And then the last 4 weeks after coming out of their bye, Herbert's just throwing the ball a ton more. He's averaging 33 pass attempts a game, which is, almost a 50% increase from, maybe that's 45% increase. And he's averaging 287 passing yards during those last 4 games. So he's got his full complement of weapons now. He's only 5,200. Again, pricing is tough. And I think the matchup kind of looks tough on paper against this Titans team, but I think you kind of have to take a look at who they faced. So let's kind of look through their game log here. If you want to just pull back up Justin Herbert here. I think we'll
yeah.
we'll stack him, but let's kind of can you scroll to like so I know like week 1 they played the Bears, so Caleb Williams making his NFL debut. Oh, am I looking at this incorrectly? No.
Wait, no. So you want the game log for Justin Herbert, or you want like the game logs against?
I want the Titans. I want the Titans game logs.
Oh, I can pull that up. I know that you're a big fan of that. Let me just pull it up real quick here. Game logs against.
Oh man, this is even my favorite site too. So this is perfect.
I know you were the one who told me about this site. I mean, shame on me for not knowing about it sooner. But here we go. Yeah, quarterback versus Tennessee, Caleb Williams
making his NFL debut. Then he had Aaron Rodgers. Again, not bad, but Aaron Rodgers is 40 years old. They got Malik Willis. They got Tyler Huntley. Then they got Joe Flacco. Yeah, they did have Josh Allen. They had Jared Goff, who only threw the ball 15 times. And they had Drake May making his 3rd or 4th start. So, like, yeah, they've looked better on paper. But, like, they've played 2 or 3 decent quarterbacks. And, Josh Allen went for 323 and 2 touchdowns. Like Drake May last week. He only had 200 yards and a touchdown, but he also had 95 yards rushing. And Herbert has some sneaky rushing upside. So I think that's a spot I'm really interested in here. And I think that his stacking options are really straightforward here as well. So let's start with Justin Herbert here in this build at 5,200. And Herbert's kind of one of those guys that could go either way because he does have a little bit of sneaky rushing upside. And so he's a guy I think you could play as a skinny stack. But I think in this build, let's build him as a double stack just because I think his passing options are just really very straightforward. And to me, that's Quentin Johnston and Ladd McConkey. They're both at kind of that discount type pricing at 5,900 and 4,900. And so I think that makes this pretty straightforward. I don't know that this is a spot where you really need to have a run back in just because I think the Chargers defense is pretty good. And there's, I think that if you were looking to stack this, there are kind of three ways that you could kind of go here. You could look at Tony Pollard. Tony Pollard seeing like 20 touches each of the last like 5 games. So you could do that betting on volume. He's involved in the pass game, but I think he's pretty expensive. Like I think he's like almost $7,000. And I don't know that he has, I think last week was like his best game of the season and he put up 21 points. So I don't know that you could go there. You could look at Calvin Ridley, who's been a lot more involved since DeAndre Hopkins trade, or you could kind of punt and look at tight end and look at Chigo Okonkwo, who's kind of seeing 4 or 5 targets a game, and he's like $3,000 flat. You could do that if you wanted, but I think on this build we're not going to have a bring back because I really want to focus on like 1 or 2 one-off plays here. And so to me, there are 2, like there's probably, let's say 3, like really, really strong on paper plays, like just borderline slam dunks. And like any play can fail, but I think that there's like 2 or 3 situations that I think are just hands down much better options. And the first we talked about is Justin Jefferson at wide receiver. He's just in such a smash spot against Jacksonville. Like Jacksonville has given up like the overall quarterback 1 on the slate like 3 or 4 times already through 9 weeks. And generally with a really strong quarterback score comes a really strong wide receiver score as well. So you could consider the Vikings quarterback, who is, I'm drawing a blank on right now. You're on mute, but I appreciate you helping me. You could consider Sam Darnold, but I think on this build, I want to just go Justin Jefferson.
Yeah.
So we'll just kind of pencil that in, and then I think that the 2 next best plays on paper are both at the running back position. And honestly, they're the 2 most expensive plays. So we're not going to see Dak for Dallas. There's a possibility we're not going to see CeeDee Lamb. AJ Brown did practice, but Saquon Barkley's averaging 23 touches a game this season, which is just kind of ludicrous. And he's likely to see the ball here at least 20 to 25 times. Dallas has been really susceptible against the run. They've let up some really big games. So I think I want to put in Barkley here. I don't know that we'll be able to get in Alvin Kamara here. Just I think throw him in just so that I can kind of see what we'll be working with here. No, you'd really be punting 3 times with Alvin Kamara. And so with Chris Olave leaving the game last week, suffered that really horrendous looking concussion. I think it's his 4th or 5th concussion of his career. I just don't see a way that he's back for this game. So last week, once he missed, Alvin Kamara saw 38 touches last week. So that's just massive. I could be wrong. He saw 29 attempts and 9 targets. Yeah, 38 opportunities. Just ridiculous usage. So to me, without Shaheed, without Olave, I feel like there's 2 plays that are going to New Orleans is got a Vegas team total of over 21 points. So Vegas is expecting them to score. And if it's not Kamara, I think the next most likely piece is Taysom Hill, who kind of operated as their RB2 last week. Saw some red zone work. I think he scored a touchdown last week. No, he didn't. I lied. No, he did. Okay, yeah, he had a rushing touchdown.
Yep, rushing touchdown.
So yeah, I like him. I think that I would expect him to kind of see 10 plus touches again this week. He saw 10 last week, and that was them kind of having to figure it out with Olave, leaving mid-game with an injury. So I think having an extra week, time to kind of scheme a little bit more, I wouldn't be surprised to see Taysom Hill touch the ball 15 times this week. So I think if we're not going to play Kamara, which we don't have the salary to play Barkley, Kamara, and Justin Jefferson, I would say let's take Kamara out of this lineup and let's put in Taysom Hill to kind of say, if Kamara is failing, why is he failing? It's likely because he's not getting the touchdowns. So if he's not getting the touchdowns, what's the most likely scenario for the touchdowns? It's probably Taysom Hill would be the second most likely to be getting 2 touchdowns. So I like this. This kind of leaves us, I feel like most weeks we have a hard time spending less than $6K at running back. So we're probably going to have to get a little bit sneaky here with some value. So let's go ahead and pull in a defense just to kind of see what the best we can do is. So on my first look, I kind of identified 2 or 3 expensive defenses. I grabbed the Bears as somebody I thought was interesting and kind of the mid-range, but I don't even know that we have room for that. And for me, my favorite kind of pay down defense, believe it or not, was actually the Broncos. So if we go ahead and pull the Broncos into this, where does that kind of leave us with salary? Are we still pretty thin? Yeah, we're still kind of thin because we're gonna spend $6,000 on a running back. So where does that kind of leave us? What environments? I was pretty high on Hunter Henry. If we play a second tight end here, a guy that has had some really strong games with Drake May. If we go Henry here at I think he's right around 4K. What does that leave us? That leaves us 6,600. We need a running back spot. I'm a big sucker for correlation. So I think James Conner is interesting. I think Najee Harris is interesting as well, but I think DeAndre Swift makes the most sense on this roster. Them kind of getting out to a lead and New England kind of playing from behind, throwing more. Because I think that New England would like to lean on Ramondre Stevenson when they can. So let's kind of play away from that and say, okay, if they're not able to lean on Ramondre Stevenson, they're having to throw the ball more. Why is that? That's Chicago's getting out to a lead, controlling the game, running the ball more, and then we'll pair that with Hunter Henry.
Love that, man. Love that. And that closes the lineup out. And for those listening on the pod, I'll list out what we landed on. Justin Herbert, Saquon Barkley, DeAndre Swift, Herbert paired with Ladd McConkey and Quentin Johnston, and then Justin Jefferson, a one-off at the final receiver position, then Taysom Hill, Hunter Henry, and the Broncos defense. I love Taysom Hill, man. I think that there's a good chance that if I might just lock him this weekend, because I honestly feel like, or even just be completely fine with playing 2 tight ends, because I feel like Taysom Hill, he almost feels like playing a running back that's at 4K who gets solid red zone usage. And like you said, his touch count could rise this week. Feels like you're getting a running back that you can play in the tight end if you want, or just play 2 tight ends. So love Taysom Hill, but the whole lineup is good. Any other thoughts for you before we ship this?
Yeah, I mean, I think if you don't want to play 2 tight ends instead of Hunter Henry, like you could easily play Parker Washington at the same salary for Jacksonville. He saw increased role last week. I think he had 5 or 6 targets. He's 3,900, and he would correlate with Justin Jefferson in that same game. So I wouldn't mind that as well, if you wanted to kind of get away from 2 tight ends. But I kind of like this build. I like kind of having that correlation with Swift, and the bet we're making on Taysom Hill is kind of some leverage away from Kamara, who I do really like Kamara as well. But I think it's going to be really hard to fit Barkley, Kamara, and Justin Jefferson in a lineup this week.
Yep, absolutely. And love how you built it. I definitely like Justin Herbert this week. Guys, thanks for listening. Thanks for watching. However you consumed the content today, we appreciate you being with us. Stat, good luck for week 10, man. And we'll talk to you next week.
Yep. Thank you, Cheese. Hope to see some OWS rosters at the top of leaderboards again this week, my friend.